Michael, sir, thank you so much for being with me today. Really loved our actual pre-chat before we kicked in here, and I had to stop it because I was enjoying it so much so that we didn't get distracted and fail to get into the conversation here. So yeah, really excited to have you on board, and thanks for making the time.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Amazing stuff. So yeah, we always kind of kick off with get a little bit about your background. So go back as far as you possibly can. Tell us where you grew up, what life was like, what your childhood was like, what your interests were. Give us that kind of foundation of you as a person as you were in your early years.
Yeah, good. Thank you for this opportunity, because I feel like a lot of times people just see the, 10-minute videos, but they kind of miss who the person is, right? So I grew up in South United States, in Texas, born and raised in Texas. Middle class family is what I raised up in. Not a family that was very heavy into investing and individual things like that. So I kind of found that on my own, but growing up, had a wonderful dad, had a wonderful mother, had a sister. We were all real close, tight-knit family in Texas. Growing up, was just interested in sports, things like that, but always was an entrepreneur. When I was 13, I was making flyers that I'll mow your yard for this much and trim your weeds, and going to put all those flyers in the mailboxes and things like that. So I always had like a business-minded spirit. And then when I was 17, I ended up meeting who is now my wife, and we have two beautiful children. And I ended up going to college for instrumentation, which is an associate's degree, a craft, and then eventually became a chemical engineer. And I was doing that full time until my content came out, and this business kind of evolved into what it is today. And we were chatting. A lot of people say, "Oh man, it must be nice to be able to work on your own." I work so much more now than I ever did when I was a chemical engineer. And but it's definitely a blessing, and I've been extremely fortunate, and just found a love for crypto along the way, and broader finance in that, because that's what they don't teach in school. Just the broad finance stuff. Like, I've never been in a class where they taught me how to balance a budget, right? Yeah. And even with a bachelor's degree, never balancing a budget in class. Like, it seems like such a fundamental thing that is so crucial for people's lives, yet it's never taught anywhere.
100%, 100%. No, I'm with you entirely. I'm fascinated to go back to the instrumentation. Tell us about that. I don't actually elaborate that a little bit more. Fascinating.
Yeah. So what instrumentation is in chemical industries and in any kind of manufacturing facilities, you basically need what they consider transmitters, which tell you how much pressure is in a tank, how much levels in a tank, how much flow you have going through a pipe. And that's what my father done. So whenever I got out of high school, I was like, well, hey, that's a good way to make a living. I grew up good. We weren't rich or anything, but we were middle class and had everything I ever needed. Yeah. And so that's what I went to college for. I got married very young at 18. So prior to going to college, I ended up working in a pipe shop with just fabricating pipe. And then my wife and I worked to put myself through that associate's degree, so a 2-year degree, what we have here. And then whenever I got hired on with a major company, they sent me to school for the engineering portion. So that was very nice, and I was able to meet a wonderful craft, learn a wonderful craft, and it even helps me a lot today with the thought process and how I think about things.
That's actually why I double down on it, because I'm always fascinated speaking to someone like yourself as to how that original craft, as you said, or education, how that applies then to your style of thinking. Obviously, coming from a chemical engineering background, you're very much thinking in processes, and also you're thinking from an elements perspective, I guess, from the chemical side, which I find like so interesting when you're bringing that mindset into what you're doing today. But what you baked into what you shared there as well, which is really illuminating and particularly interesting, is you were married at 18. That's rare these days. Tell us about life as a married man at 18 years old. Really unique.
Yeah, I mean, it's poor, I'll tell you that. but I'll tell you the good thing about it. So I was a little bit of a troubled kid in my 16, 17-year-old. I was pretty wild. And she's actually what saved me, brought me in, you know, because I was running around partying, doing all that kind of stuff as a young guy. And then I got married and I had responsibilities, right? And I remember working in the pipe shop and we had $30 a week for food. And so back then you could buy chicken legs, like 18 of them for like $3. And so that's what we ate constantly. But, you know, I'm very appreciative of that because whenever I look at everything I have, and I'm not loaded rich or anything like that, but I do live a good life, but being able to look at all of it, we earned it all together. Right.
Yeah.
Versus if here I was in my, you know, early 30s and I tried to meet someone, I would have a lot more questions, you know, why are they into me? Are they into me for the right reasons, for the wrong reasons? You know, where back then I didn't have no money. So it definitely wasn't that, you know, and so we were able to really build everything together. And I think it's a great thing to do. Get married young, have more kids than you can afford, and you figure it out throughout the way. You kind of have to figure it out, you know, when you get a little pressure behind you, you got mouths to feed. It's something about a man makes it happen, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It is such a kind of sage advice that you really do hear from people who marry young and have a lot of kids. I think it's a really interesting insight as well into, you know, a lot of our parents, grandparents, grandparents, generations would have been somewhat match made or at least encouraged to marry early. And the big thing that you hear is what you just shared, Michael, is that, like, you know, when you're with someone so young, you build together. So it's just natural that there's never questions and concerns about, well, I was this level of success before we met, all the usual things that lead to many of the blow-ups of, you know, high rates of divorce these days. So yeah, very interesting kind of side note that you shared.
For sure. Like they say, the number one problem that causes divorces is lack of money. And so when you marry and you're poor, it's like, well, hey, if we can get married when you're broke, you know, then everything from there is, you know, upside, right?
Exactly that. And as I said, if you've got minutes to feed, it gets you out of bed in the morning, regardless of how you're feeling, and just gets you acting and not thinking. So yeah, I guess so. You moved from instrumentation into chemical engineering. So how many years were you kind of in and around that space of working in chemical engineering?
So I was in the entire industry for 13 years, and for the latter third was in a chemical engineering role.
Okay, interesting. And then within that, what was your like? What did that look like from a day-to-day perspective?
Yeah, basically I was over capital projects, or I worked on capital projects. So new construction engineering, regarding analytical is what it was. So a second ago, I talked about instrumentation, where you're able to tell pressures and flows and things like that. But in an analytical perspective, you're looking more at composition. So what is the purity of this specific element, you know, whether it's ethylene or propylene, whatever it is. So you're more analyzing the specific components of that. But I had a great time doing it. It's a great industry, great degree, great craft. And it's one of those that when I look at it, those are the more AI proof type of at least for now, right? It's a little more hands-on. And I think if you're working with these right now, you know, a little bit of mind, a little bit of hands, I think that's the best route to go for this AI world that we're moving into.
So true. It's amazing to see, like, you know, rates of people going into becoming a plumber, an electrician, a carpenter. Are, you know, in some countries are accelerating because they are somewhat, for the moment, AI proof. So you make a really interesting point. So you're in that industry for kind of, you know, 13 years or so, more or less. Talk to us around the first time you came across crypto, as a not from a content creator perspective, just as you, Michael, an individual person.
Right. First time I came around crypto was high school. So, you know, Bitcoin was hundreds of dollars at the time. You know, I didn't have no money to buy it back then. The first time I really had an opportunity to make some money into crypto was when I bought Dogecoin, put $200 in it. And I remember I panicked because it went down a little bit and I sold it. years later, I was in Vegas at the time. My buddy called me, "Hey, dude, look at Dogecoin." So I check it out, and it was when Elon was on Saturday Night Live and all of that. And I did the math, and my $200 would have been worth $85,000. And at the time, it would have been extremely, I mean, that's a ton of money, right? It's a ton of money for anybody. And it would have been life changing. But I definitely fumbled. That, but that also taught me a very important lesson within investing, right? You have to make those mistakes along the ways. But I'm somebody that has been interested in cryptocurrency for a very long time, since as early as I can remember. But I bought my first portion of Bitcoin. I would say not my first whole coin at the time, but around 2017-ish.
Early doors, understood. 2017, fantastic. And from there, yeah, actually, on that note, was it socially you came across it? Like going back to even high school, which was super early, was that just through friends, or how did you stumble across it?
So I always have been a consumer of content, especially YouTube content. It's an interesting story how I got here, but it's always just been through consuming content on my own. In fact, not a lot of people in real life, IRL, that I know are into crypto. Only one of them, who ends up being my best friend, he invests in Bitcoin, Ethereum, and now starting to play in other altcoins. But he's played at the probably the smarter route over the last 10 years. Like if you just bought Bitcoin early, you'd be good instead of trying to chase all the altcoins. But they definitely all have their place in the world. But it's really been through consuming content. And I learned very early that, because I like to study history a lot. And that's when I learned, oh, wait, we got off the gold standard. Like we used to be on a gold standard. Well, that made sense. Our monetary system was backed by a physical asset, gold. And then I just realized how much of a Ponzi kind of, and how inflation is baked into fiat currency. It's why the Federal Reserve has a goal target of 2% a year. They are telling you our goal is to make your money worth 2% less each year. That's essentially what inflation is. And so I learned that very early. And what was intriguing to me about Bitcoin was the fact that it was a fixed asset and there was no increase in the supply. Whereas with the Federal Reserve, we all know they can increase that supply. They did, back in 2021, and they're about to start doing it again. So it was just really getting into fixed hard assets.
Understood. The history aspect is really illuminating. And I think, one thing that is, I guess, exciting in a way about the propulsion of crypto over the last couple of years is that it's really actually helped a lot of people understand the financial system in a way that they never would have questioned before, because it was just so natural to how we live. But it really has raised this whole concept of really understanding what is the value of anything, and the comprehension of a store of wealth in its multiple different forms. So I guess that's a really good point as well, that you were first a consumer, but definitely a smart consumer by the sounds of it. You weren't exactly gorging on junk content. You were using YouTube as an education piece. And I guess it's ironic in a way that all these years later, you are now that person to so many others. So I guess going towards like 2017, you invested for the first time. Talk us through the next couple of years, and then bring us towards the point where you said, hey, you know what? I'm going to take out a camera and start recording.
Yeah. So I was just very heavily started getting into Ethereum. And then, coming up to a couple years after that, the NFT cycle, I did very good on NFTs. I was in a lot of NFTs early. Now, I did not mint the Bored Ape or Crypto Punks or any of that, but I did do pretty well in the overall NFT space whenever that came about. I also still have some that were worth a lot more when I bought them than now, but I am a fan. And I realized early that technology, non-fungible tokens, is going to change the world. And I don't mean the Bored Apes. I'm talking about tokenized real world assets. We're starting to see a lot of that. And that's one of the narratives that I'm most, happy about going forward and most bullish on. But the funny story of how I started making content was, it was never a dream of mine to make content, nothing like that. I was never somebody that was posted on Instagram or any of those growing up, or, I never really cared about that. I had a Facebook page. I'd get in touch with family, but never, I was never striving for that. And probably 3 years ago, I owed 5 extra grand whenever I was doing my taxes. At this point, I was a chemical engineer, so was making good money. And then my wife was working in the medical field. And I said, golly, I paid all these taxes this year and I owe 3 or 4 more grand. So I started Googling, how can I get out of paying taxes legally? And they said, start a home business. And I said, okay, well, what's some easy home businesses? I got a full-time job. We had little kids at the time. What's a good, home business? And they're like, start a YouTube channel. And I was like, well, I sit here and watch YouTube, on my lunch break, on the way home, when I'm, in the shower. I'm always studying crypto YouTube. And so I said, let me try it. So this studio at the time looked nothing like it does now. It was painted pink. And I still have my videos up on YouTube, and I had a laptop that I'd gotten when I was going back to school for the chemical engineering degree. And so I just opened it up and started talking to the camera. I had no mic, no lights, no camera, just whatever was on that old Mac Air. And that's how it started. And I always had a love for educating people, whether it was teaching people English. Even later on, after I became a chemical engineer, I created analytical classes, and I taught at a local community college. So I created the courses for the college, got them approved, and was actually teaching those. So I always had a real want for being able to educate people, because like we said a little bit earlier, there's so much in the traditional education system that they just do not teach. And that's why a lot of people are in such bad financial positions. But so I opened up that laptop and started making content. And I was very interested in the ISO 20022 narrative. So this is, XRP, quant, assets like that. And I started covering those a lot. And then I came upon Caspa, which I believe is a very great proof of work network. It's very similar to Bitcoin in that sense. It's proof of work. It's a fixed supply, but there's a lot of differences in it. And the fact that it is about to have, not currently, but VPROGs, which are the equivalent of just like, say, Ethereum smart contracts. And so that's something that I really got into, but I had to find my niche a little bit, because even though I loved covering Bitcoin, if myself as a small creator covered Bitcoin, well, nobody would watch it because all the big creators were talking about it. So I found my niches within Caspa, and then Coinbase came out with Base Chain, the layer 2, and I started covering that. And then obviously we had the meme coin cycle, the meme coin craze, and I love meme coins. I love a little bit of a portfolio and degen capabilities. And so that's where it all started, and it just grew to kind of a full-time job. And Absolutely. It's been able to come that, and we're changing the business up a little bit, trying to bring more content. But at the end of the day, the goal is to just be able to provide the best educational content on YouTube, on Twitter, and I may be wrong sometimes. It's never financial advice, but it's always my truth. It's what I believe. I always tell you exactly what I think about something. And I think that's what people are yearning for. They really want somebody that's just authentic and being true to themselves. And that's what I'm going to continue to do.
Absolutely fantastic. Put the words out of my mouth, but the authenticity, I mean, it oozes from everything that you're sharing. And I love that you cracked open the ROM MacBook Air, went at it with the baked in audio, or the native audio rather, and the native video. Was absolutely fantastic. So remind me, what year was that actually when you kicked off?
2023.
And so, with your first videos, were you straight in producing kind of a video a day, or what was the cadence? And then I guess talk me through the evolution, where you a month or two in, you said, all right, I gotta maybe grab a camera, I gotta get a mic, like give us the feel as you started to sophisticate yourself a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Of course, because a lot of people are hesitant. They don't think they have the equipment, but everyone has one of these, right? And even though I never really made content on this, a lot of people do. And so there's really no limiting factors for anyone starting content. I would totally recommend it. But for me, I started off making the video, and then a few days later I made a video, and then maybe a week later I made a video, and then one got 5,000 views. And I was like, okay, now I'm kind of on to something, right? And so I started studying SEO, search engine optimization, a lot. I started studying what different people are doing, and then trying to, see what my favorite creators were talking about and learning from them, and then trying to add my own twist on it, my own opinion to it. But I put $0 of my own money into this, and it's a very elaborate setup. But what I mean by that is everything I put into the business has been made from the business. And so right there, that's a very good lesson for people that you do not need a lot of money to start making content. Like I said, I did not even have a microphone, so the audio was bad. The camera was probably 480 or very low quality. But so then it started ramping up. And I remember I got my first sponsorship of $500, and I couldn't believe it. And I went and bought a microphone, and I recorded that video 12 times because I just wanted it to be absolutely perfect. I took so much pride in it, and I still do take extreme pride in all of my content. I just got better at it. I got more efficient at it and everything. But then it became daily content, day in and day out content every day, until probably about a year in. I got an inquiry via email about a partnership. I said, okay, I'll get back to you when I get out of church.
Yeah.
I got out of church. I tried to go to the Zoom link. It ended up not working. I tried it on a different computer, and it ended up not working. The next morning I woke up and my X account was gone. So it was a bad Zoom link. And so at that point, I didn't have two-factor really on anything. And so that's when I really understood. I did get the account back after 10 days, but they obviously use my account to try to get other people, because there was a meme coin named Turbo that ended up going to $1 billion market cap on Ethereum. And I would host all of their AMAs or their spaces on X. And so that was the route they did. They hacked me, and then they would contact people and say, hey, this is Freeman. I would love to have you up on a Turbo AMA. And this was one of the hottest meme coins, right? And so obviously people would want to do that. And it was just kind of a chain reaction like that. So I'm very, very big on security. Like, even when you sent me the link to this, I went and scanned it. All my accounts are secured with physical hardware keys. I'm very, very big on that. You can never be too safe, especially in crypto, but just with your online profiles at all, whether that's a personal account or it's, something that you utilize for business. But then from there, I went from 3 to 4 to 5 videos a week, but I realized that I had a very big gap within my entire, social presence, and that was Twitter. And so I started at that point focusing a lot on Twitter. And because what I seen was some people were very big on one platform, but they were, very small on the other platform, or vice versa. And I started thinking, you're kind of putting all your eggs into one basket at that time, because if God forbid something happened to the platform or your channel or your X account, you're very limited. So the best thing for my overall brand was actually starting an X account and being active on X. And so now where I sit today, I'm about 13,000 on both platforms where I'm sitting today. And so it's a very good balance, and you're able to meet a lot of people. I've been able to do a lot of great networking. I've been able to meet a lot of great mentors throughout this process. And a lot of that is because of the presence I've been able to have on X and the people I've been able to meet.
Absolutely fantastic, Michael. I love what you shared there. Do you notice a big difference in terms of, let's say, the people over on X versus the people on YouTube, your viewers, or let's say your viewers on YouTube versus your community over on X?
So I would say X can be a little more degenerate, like want meme coins and things like that, versus on YouTube, I try to keep that more. I mean, I do bring meme coins to YouTube, but more educational, with X, it's a lot of short form, either you're reading a tweet or clips. Like my live streams are about to be clipped, right? And people with not lower attention span, but they just don't want to sit there and necessarily watch a 15-20 minute video, right? Versus I think on YouTube, people are maybe wanting a little bit more of the education, what's actually going on behind it. They don't just want the contract address, right? And so I've seen that, and I've tried to focus also a lot on the production, more on the YouTube side. On the X side of things, it's very easy to pick up the phone and, make a quick video. But on YouTube, more of editing, B-roll, and really make it a good visual experience. Education, number one, obviously, but, also a good visual presence and learning how to really keep viewer retention over on YouTube.
Absolutely fantastic. And when I'm interested to know, when you kicked off in 2023, do you feel like what made you take this seriously was that you said to yourself, like, this is a home business. Like, I have to show there's activity happening here. Like, I can't kind of like, I can't do this randomly because I'm actually genuinely using this as a write-off. Was that part of the motivation to stick with it? The reason I ask is I'm always fascinated kind of, there's so many people who come into the space and they dabble a little bit. And I know you said you started with one video and then kind of, it was one every 3 days, you know what I mean? What got you to really stick with it and not just make it this thing that you were dabbling with and then it died off like 99% of people?
Yeah, right. So I always enjoyed educating people, like I was saying, I taught at the college and things like that. So I never started this to make money. That was never even a thought in my brain that I would ever make $1, let alone be able to go full-time content creator, right? It was just never even in my brain. And I think if you start it that way, it's a lot better, right? It's a lot more organic. And then kind of like getting married at 18, your expectations are low. And so whenever I started, I just thoroughly enjoyed it. It was something that I just absolutely loved. And I was doing all my research on these projects anyways. And so then I feel like when you are able to teach somebody something, that's when you really understand a topic. If you're able to get in front of a class and teach students, for instance, on anything, right? Whether it's teaching somebody how to run a weed eater or it's teaching somebody quantum physics, if you can explain it to somebody good enough for them to understand it, then that really helps sharpen your own knowledge base on that. And then sometimes when you're explaining something, then that triggers something else in your brain, right? It's kind of like how I use now with ChatGPT, talking back and forth, trying to get it to argue with me. It's kind of like getting an argument in and of yourself, because you're going through such this thought process and it just triggers even more questions, versus if you were only consuming and you're only storing knowledge, you kind of don't get those back and forth with yourself as much. And so then obviously it also then became a business, right? It started bringing in revenue. It started, and I realized that there was a real potential in that. But like I said, it never started out that way. And throughout this entire journey, I've made sure that, my mission of wanting to educate people and wanting to bring the best financial content to YouTube hasn't changed, right? The fact that it's became a business has not changed at all. That just, enables me to do this even more.
Yeah, understood. No, absolutely fantastic. And I think what you've elaborated is so true. Like the more we know, often we realize the less we know. So therefore, being the educator, it makes you question yourself, and it gets you out of the box of, like you said, the consumption and just storing, which I think sometimes gives us this kind of strange cognitive bias to think, well, we understand everything. But then when you go to reproduce it, it's an entirely different story. So I get you now, the education piece being the big motivator to keep things going, which is amazing. I mean, I have to say, as we're half an hour through this chat, we'll wrap up soon enough to get you back to things. One thing's for sure is you're an outstanding communicator. So it comes so naturally to you. It's like, it's a joy to to chat to someone who's so cohesive with their thoughts. That being said, were you always so good? Do you feel like as a communicator, I know you did some of the education piece back in work, but do you feel like over years on all fronts, you know, you started with the MacBook Air, you started just pumping out kind of raw videos. Obviously, you hadn't thought about becoming a professional YouTuber. Do you feel those kind of levels that you've grown through are, like, has that been a part of this? You're constantly up leveling every quarter, every 6 months, every year. Is that something that you felt?
Oh, definitely learning the entire way. I remember 1 year in, I thought, oh my gosh, a year ago, I was lost. I knew absolutely nothing. But at that point, I thought I kind of had it down. And then the second year, I was like, wow, the last 2 years, I've known absolutely nothing. You know, you just keep growing so much. But it wasn't just on my own. Obviously, I study all the analytics, and I'm still a consumer of content. Am fans of some very big, you know, YouTubers, Graham Stephan, Andre Jink from like the finance part of things, and then Cryptos R Us, Peter with the House of Crypto. Those are some more macro YouTubers that I really, you know, have a lot of respect for. And it's kind of crazy too, because, you know, these are people like George from Cryptos R Us. I watched him for a very long time. And last month I had him on my podcast, you know, and so it's kind of crazy how it all comes full circle. And people I used to, you know, look up to or that I used to watch are now, you know, acquaintances of mine, and that we have relationships. But through building those relationships, you're never going to do it all on your own. And if you do think you're going to do it on your own, you're going to be sorely mistaken. And you're going to, at the least, limit yourself drastically. And so one thing I wanted to do was try to build relationships with people and try to bring value to them in any way possible that I can. Because, like, let's use George from Cryptos R Us, for example. Obviously, him coming on my podcast is a lot bigger benefit to me than it is to him, right? But with that in return, how can I bring value to him? You know, and so just being able to work through that and find mentors who y'all could mutually help each other out has been the key to everything. I have a plethora of mentors. Someone else I met, Sam, with my financial friend, you know, just a lot of people that I've been able to meet, and from there connections come out and a lot of great things. And I truly believe we're just in the beginning of all of this. I think cryptocurrency as a whole is a very, very young industry, even though I've got gray hair because of crypto, probably, maybe the kids a little bit, but crypto, but we're still in a very young industry, right? 3 trillion overall market cap. That's less than just Nvidia in the stock market. So we're in a very, very young industry. And we're also at a time where I've just been blessed enough to switch over to be a full-time content creator. And so I think, you know, I have very high goals for myself in terms of the channel, in terms of my X, in terms of my educational presence. But I couldn't have been here without some really good people along the way helping me out and giving me a ton of advice.
Yeah, 100%. 2 real big takeaways from what you've shared there. One is, you know, the reciprocal value. Absolutely great point. I'm sure those mentors of yours, it sounds like in a reverse way, you're also a mentor to them on specific things. So I think that's a really interesting takeaway. And secondly, just the relationships, you know, the fact that you've built genuine friendships, relationships throughout what you've done over the past few years. I think that's a really good piece of inspiration for anyone who is watching this, regardless of what industry they're in. You know, it can feel like these days, given a lot of people work behind, you know, a screen and a laptop and a phone, that like true relationships are not plausible in your career, but you've just proven that they most certainly are. So yeah, super exciting, Michael, to see where things go over the next few years. I guess one big thing to kind of wrap up on, now that we're, you know, 2026 and racing rapidly towards, you know, basically the latter part of the decade as we're in, what excites you most about being a content creator for the years ahead?
Ooh, what excites me the most? Well, I'm excited for the adoption of crypto. I think as crypto adoption comes, viewership's going to come. And because you look at a lot of the content creators, they got large off of Bitcoin and XRP. And then you have some niche things like people that were really into NFTs or things similar to that or meme coins, but I think we're going to get a lot of adoption coming in. You know, obviously we have the Bitcoin ETFs, the Ethereum ETFs, and there's adoption in that sense. But we've got the Clarity Act coming. The Genius Act already passed, right? And that was routed around definitions and a little bit of stable coins. But now the Clarity Act is something that's being hung up right now in Congress. There's some debates around yields for stable coins. And the reason that's being held up is because it's a threat to the big banks. It's a threat to the big banks that are paying you 0.02% interest on your money, whereas a stable coin USDC through Coinbase could, you know, pay 3 or 4% potentially, right? And so I think that is one of the few reasons that crypto is a little stagnant right now. But once we get that type of the Clarity Act coming through, I believe we're going to have a lot more liquidity come into crypto via stable coins. And then from there, just the tokenization of absolutely everything. I'm somebody that believes when I have a grandchild in 20 years, that his social security and birth certificate is going to be an NFT. Like it's going to be, not that you could, you know, physically see it or anything, but it'll be a real world asset on the blockchain. And I think that's where the entire world's going. You know, Ondo, for instance, is tokenizing a ton of stocks. And I also think real estate is going to get streamlined. We have a lot of processes within the world that are not efficient at all. And if we were able to look and put it all on chain, it would all of that would go away. It would be streamlined. Whether you're talking about where did this $10 billion go that was given to this finance, you know, this government organization or to this state, if all of that was on chain, which there might be reluctancy to do that because of the transparency behind it. But long story short, I believe we are going to get mass real world adoption into this industry. And I could easily see the overall crypto market cap, you know, doing a 10x. And that's not necessarily only Bitcoin. Like I could potentially see Bitcoin's dominance, like Bitcoin still being huge, but us having a whole other sector in crypto where half of it is like real world assets, you know, tokenized real estate, tokenized stocks, and means of just bringing real world items, real world tasks on chain for transparency and efficiency. So that's where I'm wanting to shape my content and what I'm looking to find some of those very, very niche outlets that I think are going to be first to be tokenized. And I just believe we're going to have a ton of people being interested in cryptocurrency and using it.
Absolutely fantastic, Michael. I couldn't agree more. The real world adoption is happening rapidly. There's no doubt about it. Before the end of the decade, it's going to be integrated even more so than it is, because I think that's one of the interesting things is we sometimes don't notice that there is actual real world integration happening around us that sometimes goes unseen because it's masked. But I think that is going to become more and more the norm as the years go by. I've loved our conversation. I'm pumped to chat to you again in 12 months' time to see where things are for you. I have no doubt that as you've taken on this next step in the journey as a full-time content creator, that everything is going to just continue to expand. And I have absolutely no surprise that you've gone on to build such amazing relationships in the crypto world, because you're such a personal guy, Michael. I'm super grateful for the time and really excited to chat again in the near future.
Well, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to it, and I appreciate you having me on today. If anyone hasn't followed me or don't know me, please on YouTube and X at Finance Freeman, and we'll have live streams kicking off on February 2nd throughout 5 days a week, covering market open and market close. We're going to be doing multiple live streams. A lot of content's coming. So we're talking 12 months and see how all that panned out. And like I said, I really appreciate your time and for having me with your community.
Absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Michael.